All right, guys, this is the last lecture on Unit 3, which again is all about culture. We've already talked about things like folk and pop culture and language, and now we are going to learn about religion and ethnic landscapes. That's what Chapter 8 in your textbook is all about. So again, this unit covers Chapters 6, 7, and 8. Cultural values are in themselves neutral as well as universal, and so much depends on how individuals or ethnic groups use them. Values are influenced by so many factors such as geography, climate, religion, the economy, and technology. Remember, the cultural landscape refers to the Earth's surface as modified by human action. Naturally occurring phenomena like forests, shorelines, wetlands, mountains are not included. Just things that you can see that humans have done. Now, that's obvious things, like in this case, we're going to learn about religious buildings, but it's also things like agriculture. Both of those are part of the human cultural landscape. So religious and ethnic landscapes. Compared to other aspects of culture, religion is relatively resistant to decay over time and distance. An example of this, descendants of immigrants may adopt a new language, but continue to practice the faith of their ancestors. Your goal is to develop strong mental maps of your origins, diffusion, and distribution of major religions and their divisions throughout this lecture. Ethnicity refers to a group of people who share characteristics such as ancestry, language, customs, history, and common experiences based on group cultural traits. Ethnicity is not the same thing as race, all right? And when we talk about race, and we'll talk about it more in our next unit, but race is based on what you look like, what your skin color is. Ethnicity is more about the group of people tied to a specific geographic place. So what we refer to, as Black people, in terms of in Africa, there are thousands of different ethnic groups, and they may look like the same to you, but they're not. They're totally different ethnic groups. Each tribe in Africa is a different ethnic group. Same with, let's say, the country of India. All right, their nationality is Indian because that is the particular country that they're located in. But within India, there are lots of different ethnic groups. So another example is Russian Jews make up a different ethnicity than Russians in general. Russian is its own separate ethnic group, but a Russian Jew is Jewish in terms of ethnicity. So their nationality may be the same, but they have different cultural traits like religion. To analyze religious and ethnic groups, geographers try to do three things: define, locate, and study. Religion and ethnicity are easier to define than is the process of examining each group's space, place, identity, and movement. So geographers map these cultural hearths, which is where things begin, and track movement. Patterns and landscapes vary by place and region at various scales. Remember, scale has to do with kind of that zooming in and zooming out, looking at things from a local, a national, and a global scale. So the regional level, for example, in the US, we see Baptists are the most common religious group here in the South. So throughout the South, what we refer to as the Bible Belt is because it's mainly Baptist, which is a specific denomination of Protestant Christianity. At the state level, some is true for some states, including South Carolina. So the majority of people in South Carolina, because it's part of the Southeast, are Baptist. Then you can look at the county level, and some counties in South Carolina have more Methodists or Lutherans than Baptists or other groups. So when we look at this information from different scales, we see different information. So here we see a map of the various different religious affiliations that dominate the U.S. Now, what is going to be true for all of these, besides no religion, is that all of these are different types of Christianity. 90% of the population in North America considers themselves to be Christian, so that's the religion. But Christianity is broken down into three major branches, which the largest branch of Christianity throughout the world is Roman Catholicism, which are the Catholics. Then we have the Protestants, and then we have Eastern Orthodox. So here in the U.S., it's majority Protestant. So Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Protestant, Pentecostal, those are all types of Protestantism. Then we see Catholics. Catholics, as you can see from this map, dominate the Northeast and also the Southwest, whereas we see the Baptists here in the Southeast, and we see Lutherans up here in the upper Midwest. And then we see groups like the Mormons over here in Utah. So you definitely need to understand this religious makeup of the United States. So we were just looking at the national scale with the entire U.S. Now we're looking at the state scale of just South Carolina. And as you can see, looking at the state scale of South Carolina, which is broken down by counties, we can see the majority of counties, most people are Baptist, but that there's pockets of these other types of Protestant Christianity found in South Carolina. In all religions, there's different degrees of adherence. So some people may consider themselves a Christian, but they don't go to church very often. While other Christians, go to church every Sunday and every Wednesday their entire lives. So and that's true for every religion. There's a very big degree of adherence within the religions. Now, fundamentalism is an attempt to follow a literal interpretation of a religious faith. So believe that people should live traditional lifestyles similar to those prescribed in the faith's holy writings. So being a fundamentalist of any religion means that you are very, very strictly following the rules of that religion. So examples, girls leave school at a young age, live in an arranged marriage, and avoid working outside the home, often enforce strict standards of dress and personal behavior. And this is true for all three of the Abrahamic religions in terms of fundamentalism. They all basically say that in the text. And so fundamentalist Christians, fundamentalist Jews, fundamentalist Muslims, all of that would be true for them. So strength of fundamentalism. It often diminishes with greater distance from the religious hearth. So take, for example, Islam. Islam started in what is today Saudi Arabia, in the city of Mecca, and so it makes sense that the people of Saudi Arabia are more fundamentalists when it comes to practicing their religion than Muslims that are located in places like Malaysia and Indonesia, even though there's actually more Muslims in Indonesia than there are in Saudi Arabia, but the ones in Saudi Arabia are more likely to be fundamentalists. So as we were saying that the Arabian Peninsula in countries like Saudi Arabia, many people are very fundamentalists, and that even plays into government's role as well. So we see that in some of these countries, they follow strict Islamic law, which is known as Sharia law. And those countries in the Arabian Peninsula that follow it are countries like Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Now, what we call a country, and it doesn't have to be an Islamic government, but any type of government that is governed by religion is known as a theocracy. So countries whose governments are run by religious leaders through the use of religious laws. Now, most of them today are Islamic countries, but again, they don't have to be. Kind of the best example is Iran. So the country of Iran's main leader, who's known as the supreme leader, is also known as the Ayatollah, which is like a leader in Shia Islam. And so that's what makes it a theocracy. But we see that strict religion also plays roles in several other Islamic countries like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and so forth. Now, an example of a theocracy that's a Christian theocracy is Vatican City. Vatican City is a separate country, and the Pope is not only the head of the Catholic Church, but the Pope is also the king of Vatican City, the country, which makes it a theocracy. And the word theocracy actually comes from Greek, and Greek for God is theos, and then we see power. So here in the U.S., we said that the majority of the population are Christian, but different types of Christians. And that really happened from the very beginning of the U.S., before it was the U.S., when it was just colonies. Different groups of people from different parts of Europe who practiced different types of Christianity moved here. So in New England, which would include Massachusetts Bay Colony mainly, we saw the English settle there with the Puritans and the Pilgrims, which would have been Congregationalists. Then the people who moved here to the south were mainly going to be people who were a lot less connected. And so the Baptists and the Methodists are really what take over here because of traveling preachers in the 1800s. So that's known as evangelicalism, is really what spreads Baptists, making it the dominant Christian denomination here in the South. The Lutherans, which we said are found in the upper Midwest in places like North and South Dakota and Wisconsin, is because of German and Scandinavian settlers who moved there in the 1800s. So Germans and people from places like Norway and Sweden moved to those places, and they were Lutherans. In fact, Martin Luther is the person who started the Protestant Reformation, and he was from Germany, and so that's why we see that in that location. We saw on the map that Mormons are mainly found in and around Utah, even though Mormonism actually began in New York, but the Mormons were persecuted and it made them want to be isolated. So they purposely moved to a part of the country where nobody had really settled yet because the Mormons wanted to be left alone. And so they settled in Utah in what is now Salt Lake City. And so still to this day, the majority of the population in and around Utah are Mormons because of that migration. We said that Roman Catholics are mainly found in the Northeast and the Southwest, and that's because of different types of immigration. We said Roman Catholicism is actually the largest branch of Christianity, and the majority of people in Europe are Roman Catholics. And so it's because of Italian and Irish migrants that moved to places like Boston and New York, why we see a lot of Catholics in New England. Now, the reason why we see a lot of Catholics in the Southwest is because of migration from places like Mexico. Because Latin America was colonized by Spain, and Spain was a Catholic country, the majority of people in Latin America are Roman Catholics, including most Mexicans. And so that's why we see a lot of Catholics in the Southwest. Even though the majority of the population in the U.S. are different types of Christians, we do have other religions that are found here. There are lots of Jews, Muslims, and Hindus found throughout the U.S. and smaller religions as well, but those are the largest minorities. So they're mostly going to be found in urban areas, which is the traditional home to immigrants. So for many of the Jews, places in New York City, especially parts of Brooklyn, have been large areas of ethnic enclaves for Jews. We know that here in Atlanta, we also have populations of all three of these religions as well. You definitely need to understand the hearths and kind of the basic tenets of the 5 major world religions. So what happens, especially with the universalizing religions like Christianity and Islam, is they start somewhere and then they diffuse outward. So please take a second and watch this awesome TED Ed video. It does a great job of explaining the 5 major world religions and the diffusion of them. Super, super important video, so please watch. So we really put religions into 2 different categories. We have ethnic versus universalizing religions. So the first we're going to talk about is ethnic religions. And these appeal primarily to one group of people living in one place and emphasize strong cultural characteristics among their followers, which means for ethnic religions, most of the people who practice it were born into that religion. They're not out there seeking converts. They're not knocking on your door with pamphlets trying to get you to convert to their religion. You're really just an ethnic religion if you're born into it, possibly if you marry into it, but mainly just born into it. So members are born or adopted in and share historical experience or struggle that creates strong bonds. So they rarely recruit new followers, but spread just through relocation. So if they're in more than one place, it's simply because people from that place moved there. So the largest ethnic religion in the world is Hinduism. Now, obviously, most Hindus in the world are going to be found in India. But if you find Hindus outside of India, it's not because the religion diffused, it's because people from India moved to those locations. That's very different than the universalizing religions. So another example besides Hinduism is Judaism. Now there's a lot more Hindus than there are Jews. There's almost 1 billion Hindus in the world and there's only about 20 million Jews in the world. So that's a big difference. But the Jews are kind of an exception to the one place rule simply because of the Jewish diaspora where Jews were kicked out of their one place, which is the modern day Israel, and spread out around the world. Now, they were mainly found for a long time in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. But since the Holocaust, starting in the 1930s, what we have seen happen is that today most Jews are either found in Israel, and that move back to Israel is known as Zionism, or they're found here in the United States. So most of the Jews are found in those 2 locations today, Israel and the United States. So the second category we can put some religions into are universalizing religions. So it's either one or the other. You're not both. So we said the main ethnic religions are religions like Hinduism and Judaism. The main universalizing religions are going to be our super large religions that are found in lots of different places. So universalizing religions actively seek converts to its faith regardless of their ethnic backgrounds, which means it's not just one group of people. It's lots of different groups of people because they're purposely spreading and going out there and converting. So they spread far from their original hearths because existing members spread their beliefs to others. So missionaries perform this. They go to these places trying to convert non-believers. Christianity and Islam are the 2 largest universalizing religions in the world. Buddhism. So from the video, you should have learned a little bit about these major religions, but we do need to make sure that we understand some of the kind of basic things. So Hinduism, we said, is an ethnic religion. It is mainly just found in India or places where people from India have moved to. Now, many people consider Hinduism to be polytheistic. Polytheistic means that they worship more than one god. However, it's actually not correct to say that Hinduism is polytheistic. The reason that that's not correct is because all of the different thousands of deities in Hinduism are all actually manifestations of one god, and so that is really a more complex term that you don't really need to know, but I'll tell you anyway, called polymorphic monotheism. So the true term for Hinduism is polymorphic monotheism, which means many forms of one god. All right. right? So that is a very complex thing to kind of understand. Just know that a lot of people say polytheistic, but that's not really what Hinduism is. So the major beliefs of Hinduism are karma, which is the idea that behaviors have consequences in present life or in a future life. So in terms of what you do today, you do nice things come back to you. Same thing is true in the future life because they also believe in reincarnation. Dharma is the righteous path, which also has to do with the caste system. So for part of its history, Hinduism worked closely with the caste system, which is a rigorous class structure that you are born into. And what it meant to do your dharma was to perform whatever that duty was that you were assigned to at birth within your caste. So if you were born into, let's say, the merchant caste, to do your dharma meant to be the best merchant that you could possibly be. And that would give you good karma, and then in the next life you would be reincarnated into a higher caste. So that's kind of just the basic belief system for Hinduism. Now, another thing I want you guys to understand about Hinduism is that India is a very diverse place, and so Hinduism doesn't look the exact same in different parts of India. And in fact, there's a lot of different regional variations in Hinduism, and they don't all worship all of the different thousands of gods the same way. It's very, very regional in terms of which gods are the most important in which parts of India. The next Eastern religion we're going to talk about is Buddhism. We said Buddhism, unlike Hinduism, is universalizing. The hearth of Buddhism would be historically India, what's modern-day Nepal, and it grew out of the teachings of a Hindu prince. So Siddhartha Gautama was born into Hinduism and born into the high caste. And he had actually been sheltered his entire life from the outside world and the lower castes until he turned 18. And when he was 18 and went outside the palace walls and saw the suffering of the lower castes, that was really the start of his journey to becoming what becomes known as the Buddha, and he rejects the caste system. So Siddhartha accepted many of the Hindu beliefs, like reincarnation, which Buddhists also believe in, but rejects the Hindu caste system. He advised followers to escape the cycle of suffering, meaning the cycle of reincarnation, through right views, hopes, speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, and mindful meditation. So the difference between Buddhism and the other religions that we are going to talk about is Buddhism isn't really focused on the worship of a god or gods in any way. Buddhism is really more of a philosophy on how to live your life while you're here. And so you can actually be Buddhist and another religion, and many people in East Asia are both. For example, in Japan, most people are both Buddhist and Shinto because of the fact Buddhism is more of a philosophy. Now we're going to learn about the three major religions that came out of the Middle East. These are also known as the Abrahamic religions. The first and oldest is going to be Judaism, which again we said is an ethnic religion, meaning that most of the world's Jews were born into it. They are not out there necessarily seeking converts. Most Jews are born into it. So they trace their history back to Abraham, again, hence why these are known as the Abrahamic religions, who was a religious leader who lived in the Middle East around 1800 BCE. So Judaism is definitely a monotheistic religion. They only believe in one God. Their holy book is known as the Torah, which Christians also believe in. Christians call this the Old Testament. And they also have other books as well, like the Talmud, which is supplemented with other laws and sayings and things like that. So a little bit about the history of Judaism. For the past 2,000 years, they've mainly been in Europe and North Africa and parts of the Middle East and have often been persecuted. In the late 1800s was the attempt to establish a homeland in the Middle East, and many migrated to the U.S. So many migrated to the Middle East, back to their indigenous homeland, and to the United States to escape religious persecution that they were facing mainly in Europe. So we know the worst of that religious persecution happens during World War II in what is known as the Holocaust, where Adolf Hitler specifically targeted the Jews and was able to murder about 6 million Jews during this time period. So in 1948, right after the end of World War II, with the creation of the United Nations, the UN officially declares Israel a country and a homeland for the Jews. And so many Jews from around the world started migrating then. Now, this idea that the Jews should move back to Israel is known as Zionism. So again, it starts in the late 1800s, Zionism, but really comes to a head in 1948 when the country of Israel is formed. The next of the Abrahamic religions that start in the Middle East is Christianity. And Christianity is definitely the largest universalizing religion in the world. So Christianity began when followers of a Jew whose name was Jesus evolved into their own religion based on the belief that Jesus was the Son of God and the Savior of humans. So they emphasized faith, love, and peace. Now, Christianity again begins in the Middle East. Jesus lived in the Middle East. Students always want to tell me that Christianity comes from Europe. It does not. It comes from the Middle East and the area that is around today, Israel. However, many people, I think, get it confused because most of the Christians do end up in Europe. Because during the time period that Jesus lived, what is today Israel was part of the Roman Empire. So that entire area around the Mediterranean was part of the Roman Empire. And so Christianity was able to spread very quickly through contagious diffusion during the Roman Empire because the empire was so connected. So it was actually both a good and a bad thing that Christianity starts during the Roman Empire. Bad thing because, guess what? It's the Romans who killed Jesus. Good thing because of the fact that the Roman Empire actually helps the diffusion of the ideas of Christianity to spread. Then it spreads a whole lot more in the 15th century with European colonization. So when the Europeans colonized North and South America, Africa, Australia, all of these places, they spread Christianity to those places as well. The third and youngest of the Abrahamic religions is Islam, which is also universalizing. The religion itself is known as Islam. The people who follow the religion are known as Muslims. And it is a monotheistic religion that believes in one God. Allah just means God in Arabic, and revealed his teaching through prophets. Now, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism believe in the basic same stories of Abraham and Moses, and yes, Muslims even believe in Jesus. They just believe he was one of these prophets. However, Muslims also believe in the last prophet, which is Muhammad. So Muhammad lived in what is today Saudi Arabia in the 6th and 7th century CE, meaning about 600 years after Jesus lived in what is today Israel. So the holy book for Muslims is known as the Quran. And the Quran is believed by Muslims to be from God himself, meaning that God sent the angel Gabriel to Muhammad, who was actually illiterate, and was able to compose this incredibly beautiful book. And what I mean by that is the entire book is written in prose. It's basically one long, beautiful poem. And that's actually why Muhammad was able to gather followers so quickly, because people believed that it was coming from God, because there was no way this illiterate merchant could come up with this beautiful writing. So it spread like Christianity through the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. So lots and lots of contagious diffusion, but also hierarchical diffusion that happens for both Christianity and Islam. So for AP Human Geography, you really need to know, again, just a little bit about the religions themselves, but mainly you need to know about the hearth of the religion and the diffusion of the religion. So first, again, let's go back to Hinduism. We said the hearth of Hinduism is in what historically was India, actually what is modern-day Pakistan, along the Indus River. Now today, the area along the Indus River is no longer mainly Hindu, it's mainly Muslim, and so today the main cultural center for Hinduism is actually on the Ganges River. The diffusion was mainly contagious across the Indian subcontinent and then relocation in recent decades as people from India have moved to Europe and the United States. All right, Buddhism. We said the hearth is what historically was India, what is present-day Nepal. So both of these religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, come from the region known as South Asia. The diffusion for Buddhism was also contagious as teachings spread throughout East and Southeast Asia and also relocation throughout the world. All right, for Judaism, the hearth is the Eastern Mediterranean, which is Southwest Asia. Again, that's the Middle East in what is today around Israel. So the diffusion, we said, is relocation because of the diaspora when the Romans destroyed the first temple. So relocation, diffusion throughout North Africa and Europe during that time. And then more recently, since the 1800s, the relocation, diffusion mainly to the U.S. and back to Israel. And we said again that movement back to Israel is known as Zionism. So it's called the Jewish diaspora when they're kicked out of Israel. It's called Zionism when they move back to Israel. Christianity also starts in the same place as Judaism, which is modern-day Israel. Again, that's the Middle East around the Eastern Mediterranean. The diffusion, contagious through the Middle East, Europe, and Central Asia, especially during that Roman time period, and then hierarchical through conversion of rulers who forced their followers to adopt the faith. So that was very common in Europe. So when the King of France was Christian, he forced everybody in the country to be Christian, mainly Catholic. And then also relocation throughout the world with especially European colonization. And finally, with Islam, the hearth being Southwest Asia, specifically what is today Saudi Arabia, specifically the city of Mecca. And diffusion, contagious diffusion through trade and conquest to Spain, Africa, and much of Asia. You could also say hierarchical diffusion in terms of that conquest, and relocation throughout the world through missionaries. So many religions have what are known as pilgrimages. A pilgrimage is a religious journey taken by a person to a sacred place of his or her religion. So a lot of religions have pilgrimages, though you probably, I hope, in 7th grade learned a little bit about the largest pilgrimage in the world, which is the Hajj, which is what most people know about, and that's that journey that Muslims take to Mecca. So the Hajj is the largest pilgrimage in the world, and it does happen every year to the city of Mecca to play out various different rituals that have to do with both Abraham and Muhammad's life. But again, it's not the only pilgrimage. For Hindus, many make pilgrimage to the Ganges River. Specifically, the city of Varanasi along the Ganges River is where many Hindus pilgrimage to. Many Christians, especially Catholic Christians, pilgrimage to the city of Rome, where Vatican City is located. Many Christians also pilgrimage to Israel to see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which sits on top of where Christians believe that Jesus' tomb was located, where he rose from. So for this, by the end of this section, you will be able to explain the diffusion of culture and cultural traits through time and space. Specifically, what we're going to talk about now is colonialism, imperialism, and trade, and how they help to shape patterns and practices of culture. So colonialism, imperialism, and trade have played a powerful role in spreading religion and culture around the world. And for most of that, we're talking about European culture being spread. It's one of the reasons why we're speaking a European language right now. They're speaking a European language in South America, in Australia, and all of these places, as well as the reason why Christianity is found in lots of these locations as well. So European colonization really takes place between the 15 and 1800s. And during this time period, Europeans colonized the Americas, South Asia, we know Oceania with Australia, and lots of parts of Africa. So during the 18 to mid-1900s is when European powers colonized most of Africa and Southwest Asia. So a lot of students want to think that by the time, the U.S. got its independence from Great Britain in the 1770s, that European colonization was going downhill. That's not the case at all. In fact, England's power doesn't even hit its peak until well after we're already a country. There's a very famous saying about the British Empire, and that was that the sun never set on the British Empire, meaning that they had colonies all over the world. And so, if it was daytime in India, it was nighttime somewhere else. And so, again, that's really not until the 1800s where that's the case. So I want you guys to make sure you understand that in terms of chronological order of time. Imposed cultural traits. An example of this would be religions of the native people of Africa and North America were forms of animism. Animism is the belief that non-living objects have a spirit, but many were forced to convert to Christianity. The Spanish and French spread Roman Catholicism throughout Latin America, North America, and Quebec. And again, sometimes that was forced on the indigenous populations. The British, Belgians, and Dutch spread forms of Protestantism in their colonies. So again, this helps us to explain why today most of the people in Latin America are Catholic, whereas most of the people here in the U.S. are mainly Protestant Christians. It's that difference between British colonization and Spanish colonization because they were different types of Christians. Although most of the former European colonies have gained independence, the practices left behind by those European powers are still very present in terms of language and in terms of religion today. So tea, for example, which is a British tradition, is still practiced widely in former British colonies like Kenya and in India. Religion's impact on laws and customs. So religion predates government and therefore is often the source for many present-day laws and punishments. Some religions have strict laws that have been adopted fully by governments, as we talked about earlier with Sharia or Islamic law, and that's based entirely on the teachings of Islam and has been adopted by some fundamentalist religious groups in groups like the Taliban in Afghanistan, and again, we said with places like Iran as well. No highly industrialized countries have fully adopted religious laws, but their legal codes often show influence of religion, including laws here in the United States. Many of what are called blue laws, they restrict certain activities, such as the sale of alcohol on Sundays, which is mainly going to be found here in the Southeast, which is predominantly Baptist, which is a more fundamental type of Christianity. So Colorado and other states, all car dealerships must be closed on Sundays, because again, this is that Christian idea that Sunday is the day of rest. In most countries, religious beliefs are more influential as guides to personal behavior. So they dictate what clothes to wear, how to cut your hair, when to pray, when to gather, what the holy days are, what the holidays are, all of those things. Also, religion plays a big role when it comes to food taboos. For example, many Hindus do not eat beef. Jews and Muslims both have taboos against eating pork. Religion influences how people think about natural features and what people build. So it plays a really big role on the physical landscape. So sacred spaces where deities dwell, like followers of Shinto view certain mountains and rocks as homes of spirits. Shinto is an ethnic religion of Japan, which is animistic, and that plays a big role in those sacred spaces. Other spaces are not sacred, but important for what occurred at them. Like Mount Sinai is honored by Jews, Christians, and Muslims because they believe it's where God handed the Ten Commandments to Moses. Some entire cities are sacred. For example, Jerusalem in Israel to 3 different religions. Mecca in Saudi Arabia for Muslims. Lhasa in Tibet for Buddhists. So religion and the cultural landscape. Sacred physical features are important but rare. More commonly, beliefs are expressed through the cultural landscape. So memorial spaces to the dead are traditionally close to worship spaces. Restaurants and food markets often cater to particular religious groups by offering religiously approved food, which would be known as halal for Muslims or kosher for Jews. Signs often are written in the language and sometimes the alphabet that reflects the ethnic heritage of the group. So architecture is very important to religion. So first let's talk about architecture in Christianity. So churches often feature a tall steeple topped with a cross. So the symbol for Christianity is definitely that cross, which you will see at the highest point on most Christian churches. They often reflect original architecture style based on environment and available materials. We also see differences when it comes to the 3 major branches of Christianity. So what we see in the Eastern Mediterranean churches, that would be the Eastern Orthodox churches, they mainly have dome-shaped roofs. In Northern Europe, we see steep pitched roofs, so like Gothic cathedrals of like places like Notre Dame. Christians usually bury the dead in cemeteries, but those cemeteries can vary greatly. Most cemeteries are underground. However, in places like New Orleans, where the water table is very high, they're actually above ground because if you go below ground, then water fills in. All right, architecture in Hinduism. Temples often have elaborately carved exteriors, and thousands of shrines and temples dot the landscape throughout India. So the Ganges River, we said, is the most sacred place for Hindus, and that many Hindus do go on pilgrimage to this place. The purpose is to bathe for purification. And Hindus practice cremation, and the ashes are often spread in the Ganges River. Now, the Ganges does have a lot of pollution problems, partly because of this, partly because of very rapid industrialization. But I want you guys to also understand that this difference in what to do with your dead has to do with geography. All right, so let's think about the Abrahamic religions, which all started in the Middle East. The Middle East is mainly desert, which means there's a whole bunch of land that you don't really need to use for anything, which means you can put your dead people there because you got plenty of room. However, in places like India, where they need every inch of that fertile land for growing crops, they can't waste land on dead people. So it makes perfect sense that cremation becomes part of the religion because there's not going to be able to bury a whole bunch of people and waste land on that. So geography has played that role that makes it into the religion. Architecture in Buddhism. It differs widely from place to place, from ethnic group to ethnic group. Most Buddhists emphasize meditating and living in harmony with nature. So this is represented in the stupas, these structures built to symbolize the 5 aspects of nature, earth, water, fire, air, and space, where people can meditate. And burial of the dead is a personal choice. All right, in Judaism, the worship in synagogue or in temples. And once they were concentrated in the Middle East, Jews spread throughout the world because of exile or persecution or through voluntary migration. And the Star of David is that symbol that you're going to find for Judaism. Remember, we said the scattering of the Jews was known as the diaspora. So temples vary in size based on population, and burial of the dead occurs before sundown on the day following the death, meaning that Jewish funerals happen right after the person has died. Right, architecture in Islam. Now, here's where you guys want to make sure that you're paying attention if you see photographs of questions, like an FRQ question that is asking about architecture of religions, because both Eastern Orthodox churches, which are Christian, and Muslim mosques have similar architecture, which is domes. Both of them like to use domes. So you got to look for specifics. If it's a Christian church, you're going to see crosses. If it's a Muslim mosque, you're going to see the crescent moon, which is the symbol for Islam. Another feature that's going to determine whether it's a mosque or an Eastern Orthodox church are known as minarets. Minarets are going to be these tall pillars that you see on the edges of buildings. And the purpose of the minaret is for the call to prayer. So historically, you would have had somebody who actually climbed to the top of the minaret and sang out the call to prayer. Now, today it's mainly speakers that are located up there, but it's similar to Christian churches having bells, right? It's a similar purpose, but those minarets, those tall pillars, that means you're looking at a mosque. So we said that the ethnic religion of Japan is known as Shinto, and so it's mainly just a Japanese ethnic religion. And we said it's animistic. It has to do with worshiping nature and also ancestors. And the common landscape we see is the gateway or the torii to mark that transition from the outside world to a sacred space. All right, geographic perspectives. Muslims here in the U.S. Muslims have been in the Americas since Christopher Columbus came, and Muslims were among enslaved Africans who were brought here by the Europeans. So the first concentration of Muslims was in what is now the southeastern U.S., where we live. About 15% of the enslaved Africans brought to the Americas were followers of Islam already. And then migrants to industrial cities. Between 1890 and 1917, we saw a new wave of Muslim immigrants enter the U.S. from Eastern Europe and from the Middle East. So from Bosnia, Turkey, Syria, and other lands in the Middle East. So pulled to the lure of the industrial jobs, most settled in the growing cities in the North and the Midwest. Some of the first mosques were founded in small communities in Iowa, Maine, and North Dakota. Industrial cities in the 1920s and 30s also attracted millions of African Americans from the rural South, and some joined the Black Muslims, which were concentrated in New York, Detroit, and Chicago. Today, about 1/4 of American Muslims are African Americans, and most of them belong to what are known as the Nation of Islam, which is a specific branch of Islam that's mainly found here in the U.S. There's a lot of different diverse immigrants. So in recent decades, Muslim immigrants have come from around the world. The Middle East, South Asia, Nigeria, Indonesia, etc. Indonesia is actually the largest Muslim country in the world because most of the people in Indonesia are Muslim, and Indonesia is the 4th most populated country in the world. Students always want to tell me Saudi Arabia is the largest Muslim country, but guess what? There's not that many people in Saudi Arabia because it's mainly desert. Indonesia is hugely populated, and most of those people are Muslims. And so there's way more Muslims in Indonesia than there are in Saudi Arabia. So primary places of settlement have been large urban areas, but increasingly in suburban communities, such as Dearborn, Michigan, which has the largest Muslim population in the U.S. Today, Muslims constitute about 1% of the total population of the U.S. So to find out more about all of these religions, feel free to click on this link here, which takes you to a pretty easy breakdown of all of the world's religions. All right, so that concludes Unit 3's notes. So again, Unit 3 is Chapters 6, 7, and 8 in your AMSCO books.